All right. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you're tuning in from what part of the world. It's one of those three things. And we are so happy that you've joined us today for the Chicken Box. Yes, we know. Two X's. That's the way we spell box because our theme is don't be a chicken, get on the box. And we have an exciting conversation planned for today. So whether you're tuning in live now by one of our platforms. You may be on Facebook or LinkedIn or YouTube, or whether or not you're watching this afterwards, it's fine. We're just glad that you are here. I'm Frances Toni Draper, CEO of Afro News, and the Chicken Box is powered by Afro News. Afro News, go to afro.com and you'll find out a little bit more about us. But we are the nation's oldest family owned Black newspaper in the, well, I said nation, so in the country. And we're proud to have been serving the community with news that pertains to the community since 1892. And joining me is one of our, we have three co-hosts really. One of our co-hosts, Jay Jackson Rao, right? Did I say it right, Jay? Okay, Jay Jackson Rao. And you will have to go back and catch an earlier Chicken Box to find out about the uniqueness of Jay's last name. But Jay, always, every time I see it, I say kudos to you and to your wife for, just for honoring both families in one name. Oops, I gave away what it was, but not all. You have to go back. So, Jay, good to see you this afternoon. How are you?
I'm well. I'm doing very well. Yeah, I'm excited for this conversation today. I am. I don't know a lot about this arena, so I'm actually very interested, especially the Black connections to this. So, actually joining us today is Dr. Sakinah A. Davis, DMA, Doctor of Musical Arts, who earned her bachelor's degree of arts and music at Spelman College, then completed her training at the College Conservatory of Music at the University of Cincinnati with degrees in classical voice performance and cognate in ethnomusicology. Davis has held positions at Perimeter College of Georgia State University, Clark Atlanta University, Spelman College, and El Sistema Inspired Atlanta Music Project as a vocal instructor, lecturer, and choral director. At an actively performing soprano, Davis has sung with the choruses of the Cincinnati Opera, the Atlanta Opera, and has been featured as a soprano soloist in the Symphony Chorus of New Orleans and a resident artist with Opera Creole. Most recently, she has received the honor of acceptance in the cohorts of the Future of Music Faculty Fellowship 2022 to 2023 and the National Association for Teachers of Singing Internship 2024. It's a mouthful, but welcome, Dr. Davis, to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you all.
Excellent. So, yeah, that's a lot. So can you break down sort of where you are in your career now and what got you into, into opera in general?
Well, I guess, I'll start with where I am in my career now. So I've been teaching at Xavier University of Louisiana. This is the end of my 7th year. It was an interesting introduction because I came in like right before the COVID lockdown. And so that was definitely a journey. But yes, I've taught at mostly minority serving institutions. This is the longest I've been at one. It was my first full-time position. So I'm I'm not quite mid-career academic faculty, but I'm getting there. I'm getting there. So I'm not necessarily a spring chicken, but I'm still learning some of the ropes. I am now, my position is now associate professor of voice. That's my title. And I also direct the opera workshop. How I got into opera. It was not the original plan.
Okay.
I originally had so many different things I wanted to do. I thought I was going to be an engineer, and then I thought I was going to be an epidemiologist. And all the while I've been performing. My mother saw that me and my sisters were gifted in the arts. So she had us in the arts from a very young age. So I've been performing since I could remember. And I did dance, and I got into choral music, and then got into studying voice because I went to DeKalb School of the Arts in Atlanta, Georgia. And that was my first real intense exposure to opera, because the voice teacher at DSA, which is what we called it, she is still an opera singer, Dawn Marie James. And that was at ninth grade, I saw my first opera with Atlanta Opera, and I was learning classical repertoire in the voice studio. Of course, at the art school, we were singing show choir, we were singing R&B, we were singing everything. But I started getting classical training then, and I liked being on stage. My voice woke up through classical training. That's when I really discovered the instrument. And so when I got to Spelman, I wasn't planning on being a music major, but then the chair at the time was saying, you should probably just major in music. And I was like, okay. And so then I ended up majoring in music, and it was really something that I thought I couldn't make any money doing. So I ran away from it for basically all through high school. I was like, I'm going to do anything else. But I really fell in love with it the first time I went to a choral honors choir experience in my 10th grade year. And that's when I knew I wanted to be a musician, but I didn't admit it to myself until like the end of freshman year of college. So I kept with the classical training because that's what had seemed to be working for me. And I thought opera was interesting. I had heard classical music growing up because my parents exposed us to it, though we weren't immersed. And so I learned a lot about it in my curriculum at Spelman. And then I originally wanted to be an ethnomusicologist, but I did my first opera summer program right before senior year and said, I want to learn more about my voice. And so I kind of pivoted my career goals then. And I just kind of kept going. It was like, I think I want to do this some more. I think this is a good idea. And for a while, I kind of thought about going back and focusing more on teaching history and world music. But once I got my first full voice studio teaching at Atlanta University, then I was like, oh, yeah, this is good. So it wasn't an accident. It wasn't an accident, but it was something that it took me a while to realize, oh, this is what I want to do. When it came to performing opera, again, I pursued choral positions when I was in Atlanta, and I did my first choral position in Cincinnati. And again, I just love the camaraderie. I love singing with other people, and I love the theater. I love the grandeur of opera. Directing the opera workshop was something that I realized I could do because I got that opportunity at Clark. So when this was a part of the job that Xavier offered, I was like, I can do that. Then, of course, I found out about Xavier's incredible opera history and art history. And so I was just like, wait, there's so much that we don't know about HBCUs and opera, and about Xavier's own opera legacy and opera in New Orleans, which I've been learning through multiple people here, including Giovanna Joseph and Aria Mason of Opera Creole. So it's just, I ended up in a place where New Orleans, this birthplace of jazz, is actually saturated historically in opera. So that's just been a really fun discovery for me. So I think I answered both of those questions.
No, I'm sorry it was so open-ended, but no, you did. Absolutely.
Okay.
So you did, and you used at least one term that people may not be familiar with. Now I'm trying to remember what it was. I think at the end of it wasn't musicologist, but it was something else that you had said. I'm thinking people may not know exactly what that is.
Ethnomusicology?
Yes.
Right. So ethnomusicology is the study, in a nutshell, is the study of music as it relates to culture. So traditionally, from my understanding, musicology often can be a little bit more focused on historical narratives, and it's often associated with Western European or classical US American music. But that's not, it's more expansive than that, but that's just a kind of a nutshell. Mm-hmm. The musicology really grew out of a combination of musical studies and anthropology. So we're really studying about music being a human phenomenon and how music is used to reflect and influence how people live their lives. Mm-hmm. And so that's it's a pretty huge field, and a lot of ethnomusicologists, especially if you look at some of these documentaries about music, you have a lot of musicologists and ethnomusicologists who are used as consultants. There's one that I know about funk that I recently saw, and there are a number of ethnomusicologists that I'm familiar with who are being consulted and are not correspondence, but they're being used as to give information for those documentaries. So ethnomusicologists study music all over the world. There's so many focuses that you could have.
Cool. That's really good. I'm just thinking, and glad that you're there at Xavier, and you were talking about the connection between HBCUs. And so those who are just tuning in, welcome. This is the Chicken Box powered by the Afro. We're glad that you're here. We're having a what I think is a fascinating conversation with Dr. Sakinah Davis, an associate professor at Xavier in New Orleans, and we're learning all about opera. What would you say around, and I know opera's been at Xavier for, it sounds like a very, very long time, but in general, do most students, do you think at HBCUs or other places, are they very familiar with opera? Are they very interested in opera? What are you finding? Because I know you also are teaching some classes as well.
Absolutely. So yes, Xavier has had opera for about 92 years. The opera program started in 1934, and the first performance, according to what we were learning in the archives, was 1935. But as far as current students and their knowledge of opera and opera at HBCUs, usually most are not familiar. A number of students like Xavier's a liberal arts education space. It's a liberal arts college, which right now it has a very good reputation for the sciences and pharmacy and pre-med. So many students who are attracted, they're attracted to those careers. Again, we have students obviously who want to come to Xavier and want to study music. But a lot of students, because opera is not as much of a pop culture phenomenon as it used to be, like in the 80s even, you still had opera singers on Sesame Street. And you don't really see that as much anymore because times have changed and opera's position as something that is in the forefront of cultural media is not what it used to be because there's so many other forms that have risen in popularity. So a lot of students that we get, at least in my experience, they've heard of opera, but they don't really know what it is. And a lot of them seem to say, well, opera has nothing to do with me because it's seen as something that is not necessarily related to the Black experience when we're talking about HBCUs, right. Which of course I'm learning. Well, I knew that earlier because when I was younger, I had a really, really great Afrocentric education. I went to a place called First Step School, founded by Ruth Yvonne Ash, Dr. Ruth Yvonne Ash, who was a FAMU grad. And we were exposed to Porgy and Bess and Leontine Price and these different names. And so I knew this as a kid when I was a lot younger. And my parents, like my father went to Tougaloo, so he was aware of classical singing and Black classical singers. When I got to Spelman, then I found out more. Like we actually got to meet the first African-American woman to have a full season's contract with the Metropolitan Opera, Madewilda Dobbs. She's a Spelman alumna. So I started learning more about the fact that there are people of African descent who go to HBCUs or went there that have had these careers and had this impact in the industry. It's not knowledge that is often advertised, particularly when it comes to music at HBCUs, because a lot of what takes up that space, and rightfully so, are your marching bands or your choral societies. And again, I'm a proud alumna of the Spelman College Glee Club, and so I get it. But opera doesn't always carry that space, even though as a person who's a member of the HBCU Opera Musical Theater Collective, which was started by Dr. Phyllis Lewis Hale of Jackson State, a number of HBCUs have had opera for years, and they are still producing international opera singers and opera stars. So yeah, it's just that information is not really advertised, but it's all in the archives. But it's not something that people are talking about for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting, right? Because you mentioned Xavier's, history with opera, right? And so they're the first HBCU to have staged a full opera in 1934, as you mentioned, right? My question is kind of, I guess, maybe a little bit of a two-pronged question again. Sorry, but there seems to be a tendency to treat opera as if this is sort of a European art form, and you have and that I'm sure from the outside for for the people who are not as cognizant of your work and things like that, from the outside that seems to be true. What is, because this is not seen as sort of inherently a part of the Black experience, even though historically there are, like you said, there are plenty of obvious directions that is not true. With things like companies like Opera Creole that you mentioned, how do you situate Black people's relationship with opera, like historically? And, what do you tell young Black students when they come in and they're like, well, this isn't our music, how do you find those connections? How do you bridge that connection?
So you give me the easy questions, right?
I got more for you.
So, again, this is it's a really good question. Let's see. First, I do want to say that I think Xavier, and again, we're learning in the archives on a consistent basis, but Xavier was the first HBCU to fully stage an opera with orchestra in about the 40s. And so the program started in the 30s, but what made us different was that definitely, like, because opera is all the forces. And so the fact that you have an HBCU during Jim Crow, integrating audiences since 1934 during Jim Crow, New Orleans, but also then you're able to get the funding and get the resources to have the full experience of opera, because you have the costumes, you have the set, you have the orchestra, you have the chorus, you have the soloists, you have the drama. All of that is what makes opera its full, they call it the Olympics of singing, what makes it its full entity. And so that definitely is one of the things that Xavier is known for. When we deal with the legacy of opera itself, and yes, opera is European, because opera as we know it was started by, we credit the Florentine Camerata in like the beginning of the Baroque period, in the beginning of the 17th century in Italy. So in that case, opera is Italian. That's where it was birthed. And then it spread to other parts of Europe. And then in many ways through colonialism, it spread to other parts of the world. Now, was opera the first way to put stories to song? No, that's not what it was. Again, music is a human phenomenon. Everyone has stories to tell. So all across the world, all across the globe, every single major civilization, there is some kind of music and drama that's going on. This just happens to be the iteration that took hold through Italy, through the rest of, Europe, and then eventually again spread through that exploration and expansion through colonialism to the Western Hemisphere and to other parts of the world. So one of the things I think that we're learning through films like Chevalier and through scholars like Naomi Andre and a lot of other people who are doing that archival research is that Europe was not a monolith culturally. The old world, people were moving around all the time and interacting with different cultures. So I think one of the misconceptions about opera being European is saying that opera is European and it's one demographic. No, there were classical musicians who were from the African continent that were playing in like Henry VIII's court. And so when opera is happening and opera is developing, you have people of multiple descents, including people of African descent, who are engaging with this art form and who are composing. Chevalier de Saint George, Joseph Boulogne, he was from Martinique. He was classically trained in France through his father because he was of mixed race. And he was composing operas popularly during the time of Mozart. And so, this idea of the fact that it has nothing to do with the Black experience is just because of how history has been written. But again, if you go in the archives and you look at different accounts, you see the evidence is there. So because of how history sometimes can be told, some of those stories get left out. And again, people of African descent have an extraordinary history of musical contributions, and opera is one of them. So it doesn't necessarily mean that opera needs to be more important than anything else. No, it's just saying that it's a part of the story. So when we deal with students coming in and they have this conception that, oh, opera is something that is not of the Black community, then what I and a lot of my colleagues tend to do is say, hey, one, understand that learning how to use your instrument in multiple settings, and again, I consider the voice to be an instrument. Learning how to use your instrument in multiple settings only makes you a stronger singer.
Mhm.
And again, there are a lot of benefits to classical training, like there are benefits to jazz training, right? Because different ways to understand how to use your instrument that can only benefit you as a performer. The other thing that we talk about is basically saying that your voice can do multiple things. And so tying things that your voice can do to certain types of identity as if, oh, I can't do that because this is who I am. You will contain multitudes. So why not try something different? Why not try something that can open you up, that can teach you how to support your sound without amplification? Because traditionally opera, you don't use mics. And so you have to really understand your body in both biologically and artistically, because we can't touch our instrument. So there's a lot of critical thinking, a lot that goes into just teaching the voice, period. And when you deal with classical singing, which contains opera, art song, oratorio, all these different genres, then it opens up another world that can be a career opportunity. So it's just adding more tools to the tool belt. So a lot of what we do has to do with, let's open up the concept of what your voice can do, because your voice can do a lot of things, and the voice doesn't fully mature in your 30s. So I was like, I tell my students a lot, I'm just like, you really don't quite know how you sound yet. So let your voice be a flexible idea, flexible concept.
I like that.
And again, for me, opera is something that I see as a tool that can really train students on how to perform theatrically, really know how to project and amplify their voices, and engage with stories from all around the world. Is it the only tool? No. Is it a useful one? I believe that it is, especially when applied in a way that it shows how you can relate to the human condition in these human stories, and how also you can understand, especially at HBCUs, that there are so many people who revolutionized the opera industry. Leontine Price, Jesse Norman, went to historically Black colleges and universities. And so these are people who have impacted and revolutionized industries, not to mention like Xavier, sopranos that were known for Xavier, Gail Gilmore, who currently is still living abroad performing in Germany, Annabelle Bernard, Laverne Monette, Debria Brown. We have all these people that walked through the same halls that you're walking through right now, that were able to achieve these wonderful things. So it's really about anything else in an educational institution, exposing them to ideas that maybe they weren't aware of. So now you have a wider berth of possibilities.
Yes, absolutely. So you remind me that if it wasn't for the Black press, a lot of people that you mentioned, I don't know whether or not the Black press is part of the curriculum of what's taught when you teach opera, but if it wasn't for the Black press, Marian Anderson, Leontine Price, Jesse Norman, Grace Bumbry, Kathleen Battle would not have gotten any press, because mainstream media coverage limited or just framed through a racial kind of lens. And so I was just thinking about when you mentioned Marian Anderson being the first African American to perform at the Metropolitan Opera, I think back in the mid-50s, becoming the company's first Black performer. Even that was like given 2 inches in the mainstream press, if it was there at all, on the back page and the front pages of the Black press. So if it's not already taught there, it may be just a great resource for, especially at the college level. You have Xavier's archives and those archives, but the Black press covered it widely across institutions. It just occurred to me that that's another relevant piece about the Black press. Speaking of the Black press, let me do my little commercial break. Go to afronews.com. If you're not a subscriber, if Impeccable, our third host, was here, he would say, for less than the cost of an Uber Eat, you can, or I should say Uber Ride one way, you can subscribe to the Afro. Let me ask you this. So when young people are and it's good to know that your voice doesn't really fully develop until you're in your 30s. I'm past my 30s. My voice never really developed. I'm not an opera singer or a jazz singer or any other. I'm one. I have a great appreciation of music. But how about those of us who just have an appreciation for it, don't necessarily have the gift or the talent to perform it? Are there courses that people take just to have an appreciation of opera, even though they're not performers?
Yes, there are courses where we have, and most institutions have this, where students have the ability to learn how to appreciate music on a deeper level, just in general. So standard courses that we have, which a lot of universities have, like music appreciation. We have world music, introduction to world music, where you kind of open it up to different cultures around the globe. African American music is a course that we have, and that you'll see, at HBCUs and PWIs. And most of those are non-majors. They're often core classes to fill core requirements, like creative expressions with Xavier is one of the core requirements, and usually that's music or some form of art, um, visual art. And then you also have African American music is part of the African American Heritage and Legacies requirement that we have here. But as a Spelmanite, I took African American music as part of the curriculum for the music department. So yes, and again, a lot of non-majors in those courses. Some take it to fill the requirement. Some take it because they're genuinely curious. And there are a number of people that I've met here at Xavier who, and by people I mean students, who are majoring in whether it's be political science or speech pathology or biology pre-med, who are, once you kind of get into these classes and dig in, they're like, oh, I've been in music all my life. My family are musicians. I really love music. I'm interested. What more can I do? And so then that leads us to our ensembles, because you get a deeper appreciation of music by actually performing. So we have a lot of non-majors in our symphonic band, in our jazz ensemble, in our university and concert choirs, and also in our opera workshop. The last show that we just did, we finished doing an abridged production of Carmen. We had music majors, minors, and people who this is the first time they've ever performed, and they were majoring in, I don't know, political science with a theology minor. Figure out an idea. And so it's different levels of appreciation. For some people, I've heard stories of students who were majoring in biology and minoring in music, and then they ended up saying, actually, I want to pursue music. So they go into a professional opera career in one case that I'm thinking of. And in other cases, they become very staunch patrons of the arts. And I have heard that through some accounts that I've been able to meet different different alumni at Xavier who remember seeing their first opera here. And so then they're like, what's the opera program doing? I want to support it. Or they come up to me and they say, I remember being in this show, or my aunt used to go here. I remember being in this show. So that kind of gets me to that idea of that what we do in these music departments is we really work on building community around the arts. So it's not just about training performers, so that's extremely important. It's also about training those people who will be the press writing the reviews, or who will be the patrons sponsoring these projects. And that was, I think, one of the big successes of, like Dr. Draper said, figures like Marian Anderson and Leontine Price, and then extending that to programs like Xavier. The community galvanized around these artists and around these students and around these performances. And they were like, what do you need? You need some, you need some costumes. Right. We know we used to have a carpentry department, and so they would build the sets. And so it was really a community effort to really make sure that these voices were heard and that these students got these experiences that would lead them to really good careers, and that you would have this ready-made community to support them moving forward.
Interesting. Yeah, so sort of galvanizing the community to have an investment in it early on, whether Absolutely. That's a personal investment or, your mother or something like that, sort of a familiar one, and then it kind of spreads out from there. Thus integrating this further into the Black community, which is the point, or
Yes.
letting us understand it, our connections and roots into it historically.
Mm-hmm.
I want to. I want to move the conversation slightly from sort of the historical aspects of it to the silliness of today, which would be you have actor Timothée Chalamet. He made some comments. See, you already know what's coming. This is not a two-pronged question, but it is ridiculous. Timothée Chalamet commented about opera sort of being elitist and that no one cares. This idea that opera is elitist, irrelevant, or simply not for most people. You're sitting here having done this work inside of the HBCU community. What's your framing of this, or like what's your response to that?
The first thing I will say is that there were so many people that I went to grad school with, or that I'm familiar with as colleagues, who took to social media and was like, "Well, dear Timothée Chalamet."
Yeah, I know. Good for them.
And so and I saw there was I believe, I don't want to misquote, but there was a famous opera singer I believe he's German, who he got asked a similar question. And he was saying what he loved is it kind of brought forth an outpouring of people who still do support opera and the ballet, and who maybe are not as visible on social media. Again, we talked about HBCUs having this history, but it's not advertised. So that kind of brought people out of the woodwork saying, actually, we're still doing this thing. Actually, we're still studying it. Actually, we are supporting it. Now, was he completely unfounded in where that came from? Not necessarily. I think that from my lay position, because I'm not an opera historian, I'm not somebody who is like in the know of all that's going on with all the companies, but that it seems that opera is in classical music in general is in a bit of a transition. And we saw that very clearly after George Floyd in the pandemic, the lockdown, and how, people had to adjust not being able to perform and put on shows the way they used to, and grappling with questions of, is there really inclusive language for these companies? Are they really committed to making sure that all these voices are getting heard, or are they excluding people? And so there's been a lot of excluding going on in opera, in classical music, and it's being confronted, and there's that push and pull about what is it going to become. As far as the exclusivity of it, I think that from my knowledge, opera started off as a way to, back in its inception in Italy, started off as a way to like make theater better. And so they were saying, what was the best way to do theater? Oh, the ancient Greeks had it on lock. So let's look at what the ancient Greeks did. Okay, they had music, they had chorus, they had drama, they had these big sets. And so that's how opera starts to develop as a kind of a functional answer to improving theater. So it becomes something else as people start to assign it to questions of power, or questions of, this represents, I don't know, European identity, so we're going to export it to these different places. And then it becomes this, oh, well, you have to have a certain amount of money to get these tickets. Because it wasn't always like that. There were certain situations where opera wasn't necessarily always accessible to, like, let's say, the working class. But there were a lot of other situations where you had operas, even in New Orleans, for example, where people who were enslaved were able to attend the opera. And so I was watching a show called The Gilded Age.
Yes.
And there was this whole second season had to do with what they call the opera wars and the establishment of the Metropolitan Opera. And one of the things that really struck me in one of the episodes was a character, her husband was saying, why are you fighting so much to establish this opera house? You don't even like the opera. And she was saying, it's not about the opera. It's about where my kids can go and network, and how we can match up and make the right connections to promote these movements in society. So one of the beautiful things about music is that, again, going back to ethnomusicology, all of these musical forms and institutions, they have a deeper meaning as to what it represents for human life and human interaction. So opera has morphed over its 400 plus years of existence from what it originally was to a number of other things, because people said, oh, this actually represents this. We're going to use it for these reasons. And I do think that some of what I'll speak for what I know about the United States, some of what happened was that the reasons that they were used for were more focused on cultivating certain echelons of society, so they weren't trying to include other people.
Yeah,
and then
sure.
you get to the point where it starts to suffer because you don't have enough people as society changes, and as those whoever has a say, as that changes and their preferences change, then it's like, okay, how do we keep this going when this paradigm isn't working anymore? And so that's why I say I feel like opera seems to be in this transitional period, however long it's going to take, to say, what is it that we're actually trying to do? What is it that's going to help us to survive? So to me, Timothée Chalamet is reacting to that because, like I said, where the opera singers on Sesame Street, that's indicative that it's not really in the classrooms like it used to be. And so was he incorrect that it doesn't matter? Yes, he was incorrect about that. But was he responding to the fact that there is that absence of visibility? Absolutely. And so you can see different companies going and looking at social media. How are we using social media? How are we restaging these operas to be in more modern context so that people can relate to them quicker? How do we stage it in a way where we incorporate technology, because we're competing with cinema now? We're competing with these Vegas shows that have all these lights.
Right.
And so audiences are looking for different things. Audiences still, however, want a good story. And there's something about live music, there's something about the human voice and the power that comes from a human voice that knows how to project, that I think is, that's something that's not really going to go away. So I think it's beneficial to keep educating people about it because it has merit. And even if people don't know they want it, sometimes they're like, they really do want to experience this, even if they don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of an interesting thing coming from someone like Timothée Chalamet, to be honest. Like he's I think he's a very good actor and what have you, but it's not like he does necessarily only movies that appeal to like the broad amount of people. He does very, a lot of, sort of niche things.
Yeah.
So, I mean, no offense, I love it, but Dune is not the most like everyone watches Dune, right? So like this, right. Like, so this idea of this particular art form or this, this corner of the art world is somehow not important and nobody cares. It's just a very bizarre argument to me. And that could be the arrogance of youth, I suppose. I would argue, but I appreciate your point here, which is, and I think this is kind of a fundamental issue, not just in the arts, but I think as society is changing, these things that have been sort of these walled off gardens, whether it's for, racial reasons and or, financial elitism or what have you. And I think a lot of people see opera in that way. I'm not saying that's true, but, that's how it's been perceived. As these certain demographics are dying out or losing power and the country is becoming much more mixed and things like that, then it's like, well, why isn't anyone making opera? Well, you only allowed this small group of people to make it or go to see it. And then it's like, we should probably change that. Yeah, you should probably change that. I mean, Europe is seeing this, right? Which is this idea of keeping these little towns, we're going to keep them with everybody who looks like us. And then it's like, oh my God, people are aging out and people are dying. We need to bring in people from around the world to come and live in our town. And then they bring them and they're like, oh, look, our town is back. And the culture is slightly different, but all those same things are still there. And it's just like, yeah. And opera is clearly going through the same thing. So I don't want to, it's kind of like whatever the opposite of canary in the coal mine is, right? Which is the world is changing.
Yeah.
So things like opera and the arts in general and food and just populations, they are changing around the world. So it's cool to see that's true, even in places that maybe we don't realize, like in the opera world, this is also still changing. So I appreciate your place in that. That's interesting.
No, I really do. I'm going to ask it's a related question, but it's not really about that person's comment. Historically, there have been rather operas that had blackface and other things in there that are offensive to the Black community, right? So in your view, because some people have looked at that and said, "Oh no, we shouldn't do opera because of the historical practices, the
Mhm.
stereotypical, like in Othello or Aida or something." Yeah.
Mhm.
So is the industry grappling with those issues today? I mean, especially in this very highly charged anti-DEI, environment that we're in, or is that even a discussion anymore?
Again, I haven't had that discussion myself in a little bit, but again, my world is very much centered on Xavier's opera program and
Yep, as it
including
should be.
HBCU opera program. So we don't have that same conversation where we grapple with that because we all have an understanding that that's not a good idea. But I have been in conversations in the past. There were a couple of them that I was in the Zoom room during the pandemic, and there are polarizing ideas about the place of painted face because it wasn't just blackface in opera. There was yellow face, and there was even white face that
Hmm.
was happening. And so it was not uncommon in the earliest 20th century to even have an African American opera star painting their face for a white character. And so there's a lot of history there that I haven't really dug into, but I do know that sometimes those are polarizing conversations. It's similar, I think, to something that I've been learning about the history of minstrelsy in the US, which is
Hmm.
highly overshadowed by the terrible practice of blackface and those stereotypical archetypes that were popularized through minstrelsy. But there's so much about African American musical contributions in minstrel music and minstrel shows that was not directly tied to blackface on a consistent basis. That is like the foundation of American popular music. But we're not so aware of that, and musical theater even. We're not as aware of it because of the shame of what blackface did. And so there are more scholars now who are digging into it and they're saying, like, yes, we're not condoning blackface. We're not saying that it's okay, but we need to look at what else was going on so that we can have a bigger picture of this Black contribution. And I think that that is something that is also important to realize. I'm not saying don't acknowledge what had happened because you need to know, and you need to know that this was not good. This is a bad practice. But what else was going on while that was happening so that we have a fuller picture of what people were contending with and how this actually developed without missing all these different holes. So yeah, it's a tough conversation. And again, it's not something that I'm an expert in, but I'm definitely of the field or the team, I guess, that says we need to know everything. We need to know everything that's going on and then figure out how to make our judgments based on the full gamut of information.
Yep, it makes a lot of sense. And even talking about on the other side of the spectrum, the connection, I believe there's a connection between, opera and the Black church.
Absolutely, absolutely. A lot of these opera, even to this day, a lot of opera singers of African descent came through the church, particularly in the United States, right? And some of that had to do with just the way the voice was cultivated in these Black church traditions. Some of them had to do with the fact that they had access to classical training through their Black church communities. Some had to do with the fact that that full-bodied singing that comes from a number of Black church communities. And some of them, they didn't necessarily get it in the church, they got it from blues, but there are a lot of people who came from gospel backgrounds that took to opera. And so I think that's really interesting. I think that is explored by some ethnomusicologists. Connection there.
There you go. So I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but Xavier College is a Catholic HBCU, right? It's
Yes.
Black Roman Catholic, right?
Xavier University of Louisiana is the only Catholic HBCU in the country. Yes. And so with that, and again, New Orleans has this really interesting classical music history. And so they were known for their classical music program. Opera was an extension, and that was circumstantial. The sister, Mary Elise Sisson, SBS, who founded the opera program, she was chair of the Department of Music at the time, and she wanted to send her students to the opera to watch as an assignment. And back in the 1800s, opera, people of color, Louisiana has a very big history with Creole communities, and a lot of this racial miscegenation that happened in a different way under the French colonialism versus what happened under English colonialism. So, like, the way that people moved was very different in New Orleans compared to like South Carolina or Georgia. And so there were Black classical musicians. Some of them coming from Haiti after the Haitian Revolution, who were playing in the orchestras, who were playing for the opera. I don't know as much about singers, but I have heard at least of a couple who were singing stars, who were singing in New Orleans. And then when Jim Crow happened, then all that got shut down. So it was like a reversion of that kind of mobility. So at this point, this is where enter Sister Mary Elise, and she's like, go to the opera, and the students are like, they won't let us in. And then she's like, okay. She had an operatic training background. She almost debuted at the Met before she decided to join the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament. So she used her connections to build the program so that her students would have access to learning about classical music. And then it took off into something else. I think I got a little bit off track, though. What was the original question?
Timothy Chalamet. No, I'm kidding. No, but I mean, those connections to those historical religious connections.
Yes.
With
Xavier University, Louisiana being a Catholic institution. And so classical music was standard in a lot of these Catholic communities. You know, if you think about the liturgy at the time, what music was being performed in these different types of Catholic churches, that has changed over time as well, particularly in Black Catholic communities, but or just Catholic communities that are non-European or of color. But when you so that it made sense, really, it wasn't out of the ordinary to say, okay, we're going to have this classical program at this HBCU because that makes sense with the culture of, I guess, the Catholic Church. But when you look at HBCUs in general, most of these music programs were classical in their foundation. And a lot of that had to do, I think, with the way HBCUs were working to prepare these students, these African-American students, to move about in society. And at the time, classical music was really a tool for racial uplift. And so if you were learning about classical music, you were learning about these certain types of cultural phenomena, then you got access to move in certain circles. And so it was also, I think, a tool of mobility. Someone said that after Reconstruction, I forgot where I read this, but after Reconstruction, a lot of Black families were like, we're going to buy a piano, because that was seen as a mark of access, of getting to able to participate with a certain class. And before, during enslavement, a lot of people, though there were some people of color who had that access, a lot of people of African descent didn't have that access. So they're like, now I have a permanent home. Now I can do this. You're going to learn piano, you know?
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective.
So we're about at the point of wrapping up and getting on the box. And as Jay said, you will go last. We didn't give you any warning for this, but you know, if we had, we probably want you to sing a little bit. Because I heard you say you still perform and do other things, right? I'm just kidding. I saw your face. We're not going to do that. We're not going to do that.
I was like, oh.
No, we're not gonna do that. But if somebody, and you did say you still perform, right? You teach and perform. So if people in your area wanted to hear you perform, what's your next? Where are you next? What are you doing?
Well, that's a good question. I sing from time to time with Opera Creole, so I don't do it all the time. But sometimes when they have different events in the city, I will perform. Every once in a while, I'll sing solo. Sometimes I'm just in the ensemble. The most recent thing I did, we had a performance of Margaret Bond's Ballad of the Brown King, which is a Christmas oratorio. And so I sang in that, and that was a beautiful performance. And so time to time, I'll do things like that. They have a Fête Creole that they're doing in May, but I will not be a part of that because I was not available. I am actually performing in the ensemble of a musical at Summer Lyric with Tulane University, and that's coming up in the end of July, beginning of August. And then, you know, there's some things that I'm cooking on. This last year and a half was really focused on getting this Carmen production taken care of, and so it's an interesting balance. I looked at my teachers when they were teaching singing and balancing, teaching and performing. And I'll be like, why is she calling off for today? Now I understand, because it's a delicate balance of making sure you're pouring into people, but as an artist, you have to pour into yourself as well.
Mhm.
And I find myself understanding more how I have to create an environment where I'm able to do both effectively, as opposed to give so much to the students that I have nothing for myself, because my voice is my instrument. My instrument is inside my body. If I'm exhausted, my voice is affected. And
Correct. And you have lots of talent. You're a soprano.
I'm a
Um,
soprano.
your voice sounds like when you talk like you're maybe an alto, but you're a soprano.
Started off as
And
an alto, actually. I sang tenor one year.
oh my goodness. And
So
you love, it sounds like you love to teach and you love to perform. So you're right. You got to take care of both of those things for yourself. So we're going to wrap up now. And you'll get a chance to come back and say whatever you want to say at the end. I'll start and then Jay will hop in. But let me say to those who have tuned in today, some of you have weighed in. We're glad to see you here. If you have had any questions, we should have said that earlier. You can put them right there in the chat. But we're glad that you're here and joined us today for this conversation with Dr. Davis. Dr. Davis, thank you so much for not only sharing your insight with us today, but for the extraordinary work you're doing through the opera program at Xavier in Louisiana. And in many ways, you really are helping to expand the definition of what young Black students believe is possible for themselves. I think that's as important, because it's not something that most people see every day, or understand. And so your work really reminds us that Black voices have always belonged in every space where excellence, beauty, discipline, and artistry reside. And through your leadership, students are not only learning music, they're gaining confidence, they're getting visibility and a sense of cultural ownership that can transform lives, because it says you belong in this picture. So I just want to thank you for helping to ensure that the operatic voices are not just heard, but they're understood and they're celebrated, and that this next group of young people, we won't be saying, well, Black opera singers are just a part of an opera group or have a separate, they're very much integrated throughout the art form. And so kudos to you. Continue to work on, like you said, both and, because you can't lose your instrument. And it sounds like you have a beautiful instrument that the world is waiting to hear. Those who have not heard it yet. So thank you so much. And opera is important. I like all kinds of music, and I'm glad I have an appreciation for it. I think if I had any talent for it, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now, but I do have a great appreciation for it. So thank you so much. Jay Jackson, I'm off the box. You're on the box.
Okay. Look, I'll dovetail what Dr. Draper is saying here. Yeah, if I had any talent, I wouldn't have gone into IT and audio stuff. So that's why I'm doing this. So I appreciate your work here. I think it's quite powerful. Just a point you made, and I like when you said it, it just kind of rung out at me, that idea that sort of, at the end of, I guess it was at the end of Jim Crow, where you had all these Black folks buying pianos as this kind of moving into another sort of echelon in society as they saw it. I just thought about August Wilson's The Piano Lesson, which is obviously a very famous play and now a movie, and just how that piano represented that, like, their journey through that
absolutely
137-year history that they had in the play. But what it tells me is that, music, whatever type it is, or performance or art, is so integrated into the human experience, like you said, right? Music is a human phenomenon, which is a lovely way of saying that, by the way. But it's, to me, the idea of storytelling through music in this very specific way in which opera exists is not unique to Italy or not unique to Europe or anything like that. But it is a part of the entire human story. And I appreciate that you are educating people about not only what we can do going forward, but what we did in the past and what those connections are in the past. Because I do think, to your earlier point, understanding all of it, the good, the bad, and the ugly of it all, gives us a full picture of who we are as people. And I think it is interesting. I mean, you mentioned earlier how people moved around a lot more in the world than we realized, just because the way in which history has been told. It's like history kind of started for a lot of people like at slavery. And it's like, there's a lot going on, and the world got shut off from each other, right? Because of these things, right? And we don't realize how far those sort of webs went before all of that. And so this idea of kind of unearthing through, ethnomusicology and things like that, and the work that you're doing, I think is incredibly important for us to be able to go, oh, I didn't know that we were involved in this, well before, our lives started before 1492, that sort of thing. And so I appreciate, just from a fundamental perspective of giving people a wider view of what the world has been like and what our role has been in it. Especially, like, I'm married to an artist, so like appreciating the arts and sort of the historical aspects of it, I think is powerful. So I really appreciate your work. I think it's dope. I don't know a lot about opera myself. I'm quite ignorant to it, to be honest, but I did learn a lot in talking to you and listening to you. So I really appreciate your work. Thank you.
Thank you both. And I'm a voice teacher, so I have to say it's never too late to get started, y'all.
Okay. All right.
We hear you. But thank you for that encouragement. And you are on the box. You get the last word, in the last couple of minutes that we have.
Okay, so first of all, I'm just very thankful for this opportunity to the Afro. I'm thankful to Xavier University of Communications for affording us this opportunity to converse and really talk about it. I think that the most important thing for me is that, like Mr. Jackson Rao was saying, we have to be aware of the full history so that we really know where we've come from. That's that principle of Sankofa, that Adinkra symbol, go back and fetch it so that you can inform how you move in the future. And I really think that applies to everything, including opera, including music, and that will only fortify what we can do moving forward. I would take a number from one of my students who was saying, if you want to support, look up your local HBCU. Do they have a music program? What is the music program doing? Do they have an opera program? Again, the HBCU Opera Musical and Theater Collective is going into its inaugural Summer Opera Festival, focusing on HBCU students. So there are a lot of things that are happening. And so we need to do more work advertising it and making it visible, but you can also dig in and inquire so that you can support these students in the work that they're doing. And again, look at scholars like Naomi Andre, who's really doing beautiful work unearthing these histories. Companies like Opera Creole, Americola Opera in Atlanta, who are cultivating these stories as well. There's so many stories out there. Shared Voices with Denise Graves talking about, there's the Negro Opera Company that people are learning about with Mary Caldwell Dawson in Pittsburgh. And I say all that to say, just to remind us that there's so much history out there that we can learn from and give us more of a foundation to understand how we can engage with multiple art forms, whether it be opera, whether it be something else, or whether it be another field of study, whether it be something that's scientific or another aspect of humanities that we don't know how much people of color are involved in. The information is there. Do not be afraid to dig.
Well, on that, she dropped the mic, and thank you again. Thank you to our viewers for joining us on today. If Impeccable was on, he would say, call a senior, show them some love, don't text them, pick up the phone and call them. So until next time, we really are grateful that you stopped by and spent a little time with us on the Boxx. Again, thank you, Dr. Davis. Thank you to my co-host, J. Jackson Rao. And until next time, don't be a chicken. If you have something to say, something to share, get on the Boxx. Take care.
Thank y'all.
You're welcome.